Thanks, Linda. So what are you devoted to? All right, that's the kind of the question I want us to ask ourselves today. What are you devoted to? Above all else, what do you trust in? I mean, if you're thinking about the things that you find security in life, what are they? And what these questions are is that they are questions designed to get us to think about what we worship. What are we attributing worth to in our life? Is the person that we trust in beyond all things God, or is it someone or something else? Is what we're devoted to the most God, or is it someone or something else? Because that's the difference between worshiping the true God and idolatry. You know, God does not just want to be one on a list of things that you attribute worth to. He doesn't want to be one of things that you value. He wants to be at the top of that list. He wants to be the only thing that we value, the only thing that we ultimately put our trust in. Now, there's an old John Steinbeck novel called The Pearl. And it's kind of a convoluted story, so I'm just going to try to get it down to its most basic core that I possibly can. But really, it's an allegory on what are you devoted to and in what are you putting your trust. So there's a couple, and they live down by the ocean. And they have like a really small, little, tiny child. And one day, that child gets stung by a scorpion. And it's a pretty fast-acting poison, but they think he's got maybe 2 or 3 days before it really grabs a hold of him. And they're like, well, we need to get him to the doctor. We need to get some sort of anti-venom into him so that he can live. So they go to the doctor. And the doctor's like, well, that's all well and good. Yes, I do have the exact right kind of medicine that can help him. But I'm not going to give it to you until you pay me. Well, they don't have enough money to help their kid. They don't have enough money to hand over to the doctor. Well, the husband has a scheme. He's like, well, we live by the ocean. Lots of people go diving there, and they're able to find oysters that inside of them are pearls that they sell for a pretty healthy sum. So why don't we just spend all day looking through the ocean trying to find a pearl? And so that's what they do. They start diving. They start grabbing oysters out of the ocean, and they start prying them open, looking to see what's inside. And after hours and hours of doing that, they finally open up an oyster, and inside of it is the mother of all pearls. And they're like, this is fantastic. We're going to be able to sell this pearl, and we're going to be able to get enough money where we can save our son's life. So they start calling around, trying to find some people to come and to bid on it. And so they line up kind of a whole list of people to come the very next morning and to bid on it. But it gets through the grapevine that they have had this mother of all pearls. And, they live in like a little tiny shack with a dirt floor. And the father is afraid that, somebody's going to come in the middle of the night and he's going to take it. So he goes outside in his yard and he buries the pearl so that nobody can find it. Well, the doctor comes by later the night just to check on the kid, still saying that he's not going to actually help him until he gets the money. But while he's there, he asks about the pearl, and the guy's eyes just automatically dart exactly to where it is hidden. And he's like, when the doctor leaves, he's like, oh, great, I've ruined this. Now the doctor's going to know where this is. They're going to come looking for it. So he unburies it, puts it back and buries it underneath his own bed so that somebody has to go through him to get it. Well, he was right. The doctor did see, and they raid his home in the middle of the night looking for this pearl. They turn everything upside down. He ends up getting into a huge fight with the guys that come. He ends up, making them bloodied all up, and they finally leave. But now they're worried. They're worried. People know we have this. People are going to keep coming after us. And so the wife says, why don't we just get rid of this? Let's just throw it back in the ocean. It's becoming more hassle than it's worth. But the dad says, not only can we sell this and get money to save our son's life, but this is such a big pearl. We might be able to get enough money that we can live the rest of our lives in comfort and ease. And so he says, I'm not throwing it back into the ocean. That would be stupid. And so one by one, these people come the next day, and they're bidding on the pearl. They're saying, I'll give you $20, I'll give you $100, whatever it was, all throughout the day. But the guy keeps saying, nope, 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 nope. Not a big enough offer. The wife's sitting there saying, wait a second. Any one of these offers is enough to help our son. Wasn't that what we were originally after? And he's like, no, now we know we've got this really valuable thing. Now we need to work and try to get even more money. So that night, they get raided again. And so they take off. They grab a bunch of their stuff, and they're just going to head out. And so they go down, they have a boat that's in the water, and they prepare it to travel to who knows where so they can sell the pearl somewhere for a lot more money. They go back up to the house for a second to get some more stuff. When they come back down to the boat's on fire. It's sinking. So then they go back to the house. Their house is on fire. Somebody had set their house on fire. So then they take off out into the woods. They're going to try to cross the woods and find some town where they can be safe with this pearl. And by the time they get out there, they're chased down by a contingent of people looking for this pearl. There ends up being a firefight where they're shooting at each other with guns, and their kid ends up getting shot in the crossfire and dying. Okay, it doesn't end well. It's not a story with like a happy ending with a little bow on top. And why didn't it end well? It ended badly because at some point, their value system changed. At some point, what they were putting their trust in changed. At some point, their goal changed. It was no longer, hey, we need to do what we can to save our son's life. It ended up becoming, we need to do what we can for our safety and security for the rest of our lives. Who cares, I guess, about our son in the short term? And so because their allegiance changed, because they were valuing something different, they missed out on what they were originally set out to do, which was to save their son's life. Their son ended up paying the price. If they had chosen something differently, if they had just stayed with their original goal, they would have taken the money from those initial people, fixed their son, and then moved on with their life. But that's not what happened. And instead, because of their greed and because of their devotion to their own safety and security over all else, their son ended up paying with his life. Their house was burned to the ground. Their boat was destroyed. All because they started to value something different. And it's easy to do this in life. As you get older and, routines of life set in, it's so easy to begin to trust in something other than God. It's so easy to value things other than God. And we have a word for this. Just like I said a little bit ago, the word is idolatry. It's idolatry when we start to attribute worth to things above God. It's idolatry when we start to put our trust in things or in people rather than God. And here at the end of the book of Joshua, Joshua wants to make it clear that we are not to worship idols. Instead, we are to worship the true God and the true God alone. Now you might say, Aaron, in America, we don't have a problem with idolatry. Come on. I don't see anybody bowing down to a piece of wood, or I don't see anybody with little statues in their house. That's just not something that we do. I don't see anybody offering incense to Zeus or anything like that. So stop it with this idolatry stuff. We don't have a problem with that. Yeah, we do. You know what we do? We just cut out the middleman. All right, so let's think about ancient idolatry for a second. Let's just think about Baal worship. We see Baal worship, all throughout the Old Testament. Why did people worship Baal? Why? What's the point? Baal was a Canaanite storm god. And so Baal was in charge of the weather. And so here you are, you live in an agrarian society where you're dependent on whether you can grow things from the ground. One of the things that you need the most is rain. What's the one thing that Baal offers to you? It's rain. And so they weren't worshiping Baal because he was good looking or they liked the shape of the idol. They were worshiping Baal because they wanted their own success and they wanted their own prosperity. And so, hey, if I just have to send a few good vibes Baal's way, if I have to make a sacrifice here or there, if I have to take part in an idol feast, if it gets me the rain that I need so that I can get the crops that I need, so that I can have the prosperity that I want, who cares? And it wasn't just pagans that were doing this who just believed in idols. It was good, pious Jewish people were not just worshiping the true God, but then they were adding the Baal and the Asherahs on top of it. Okay, so that they were worshiping all three, hoping that somebody would help them in their life. And so we do the same thing then. We worship our own convenience. We worship our own pocketbooks. We worship our own safety and security. We just cut the middleman out. We don't go through the God. We just go straight to the end result there, which is worshiping our own pleasure. And so Joshua tells his people here, as they embark on settling in this new land, choose this day whom you're going to serve. Who are you going to serve? Because we're done. God has done what he's promised. He said that he was going to give you the land. Here we are. We've conquered the land. We divided the land. We settled the land. Now, what's going to happen in your future? How are you going to be going forward? As for me and my house, Joshua says, we choose to serve the Lord and the Lord alone. And he's urging the people to do the same thing. As you settle in this new land, you need to worship the Lord and the Lord alone. Don't follow after these other gods because they have nothing to offer. Make God the one who is worthwhile. Make God the one that you're trusting in. The God who brought you out of Egypt. The God who parted the Red Sea. The guy who parted the Jordan River. The God who gave you bread on the ground every morning that you woke up. The God who shattered the walls of Jericho. Who made the sun stand still. Follow him. Don't worship the gods of the Amorites and the Canaanites, thinking that somehow they're going to be the ones that care for you or make you prosperous. Do not serve them because they are not real. Choose today that you're going to serve the Lord and the Lord alone. So this is why this is kind of like a famous Father's Day passage. You know, choose this day who you're going to serve. Well, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. It's usually used as a Father's Day sermon because, you know, a lot of times tone at the top matters a lot. You know, what is the father doing? Where is he headed? What is he valuing? What is he putting his trust in? And a lot of times the family unit follows that. It's important that the father of the household chooses, just like Joshua did, to serve and to worship God alone. And so that's a central truth. It's just as simple as that. You know, Christians must worship God and God alone. All right, so basically Joshua's at the end of his life here. And he's basically urging people, like with his last words here, get off the fence. Don't decide that you're going to worship a bunch of different things. You need to worship the true God and the true God alone. All right, so the events of these last two chapters, they take place years down the road. I mean, Joshua at this point is very old. And he's just trying to address the people one last time and what he expects from them going forward. And really in his words here, there are two covenants that are important. One probably that we're really familiar with, and another covenant that maybe you barely heard of in your life. All right, so let's start with the one we've all heard of. It's the covenant that God made to Abraham. If you remember, one of the promises that God made to Abraham is, if you leave Ur of the Chaldeans, and if you go to the land that I show to you, I will give you land, and I will give you descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will bless all the nations on the earth through your seed. Okay, those are the three promises of the Abrahamic covenant. The one that we're focused on here is the land, because God made the promise, and here we are 600-700 years later, and that promise is being fulfilled right before their eyes. They saw the land conquered miraculously. They've now divided it up. They've now settled in it. God has kept his promise. All right, there's another covenant that we rarely talk about. It's called the Palestinian covenant, and we find it in Deuteronomy chapter 38. If you did the study guide, I think I had you read that. And if you read it, the whole first half of the chapter is, okay, if you follow the law of Moses, and if you worship the Lord God and worship him alone, then these are the good things that are going to happen to you in the land that he's given to you. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be prosperous. There's going to be rain. God's going to take care of you. But if you decide to follow after the gods of the Canaanites, the Baals and the Asherahs, here are the curses that are going to come. And so the whole second part of the chapter is, okay, these are the woes, or here's the bad things that are going to happen if you do not follow the law of Moses. And at the end of the day, if you continue to follow after idols and you don't worship the true God, he's just going to pull you out of the land altogether. And so we call this the Palestinian covenant. And we don't really give it its due because it's kind of just subservient to the Mosaic covenant, which was the deal that God made with Israel. You know, follow the law and good things will happen to you. Do not follow the law and follow after idols and, you know, bad things are going to happen. The Palestinian covenant just specifically applies those promises to the land. But that's what's going on here in Joshua's mind. Like, here we are. I mean, we're done now. We're ready to move on with the rest of our lives. And we need to make sure that, you know, our trust in God was not just during this big mountaintop type of moment, but that our trust and our worship of God can continue when life begins to be mundane and normal. We need to choose this day who we're going to serve. Are we going to continue to serve the Lord, or are we going to follow after other types of idols? And so it's kind of similar to what we learn in the New Testament. And in the New Testament, we're told because of what Jesus has done for us, because of the sacrifices that he has made for us, because of the grace that he showed to us by entering into human history and giving himself for us, we also ought to imitate him. We also ought to be people of grace. We also ought to live out the self-sacrificial values of Jesus wherever he has placed us. So in light of God's grace and kept promises, then we need to continue to follow after him moving into the future. And so that's all Joshua's trying to say at the end of his life. Hey, choose now. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. You guys choose too. Are you going to follow the God who brought us out of Egypt, the God who made us this covenant, the God who demands sole allegiance? Or are we going to follow after some other type of God? Okay? So God warned them, years ago, that there would be influences in their life that had the potential to ensnare them. Now they need to learn that they're strong enough in their convictions to stick to the truth. And so here at the end of chapter 23, he really gets to the good part. After 23 chapters of this, he gets to the idea, Joshua gets the idea that God is a great promise keeper. He's fulfilled every promise. Not a single one of them has failed. That just what God says, just as God says it will happen, it happens. But there's also these other kinds of promises that we don't like to think about. Okay, so there's the good promises. Hey, God's going to bring you into this land and it's going to be great. But then there's also these curses. These idea that, hey, if you don't live up to this and you follow after other gods, these other kinds of things are going to happen. We call them warnings. But really the warnings are just a different kind of promises, right? If you don't follow God, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to take you out of the land. And it happened. The people did not follow the Lord after Joshua and his elders passed away. And because of it, they ended up being removed from the land. It happened to the northern 10 tribes about 600 years after this. And it happens to the southern tribes about 150 years after that. So 750 years after the days of Joshua. In the first instance, God comes in with the Assyrian army and pulls them out, and they have to leave their land. And it's the same thing with the people of Judah. 150 years later, the Babylonians come and they pull them out of the land. And Joshua didn't want this to happen. He wanted them to renew their covenant with the Lord. He wanted them to pledge to follow the Lord, to teach their children to follow the Lord well into the future. So in the last chapter, what we have here is Joshua saying, let's have a vow renewal ceremony. So, maybe you've heard of couples having vow renewal ceremonies. Many times it'll be like at a major anniversary, maybe 25 years, 30 years, 50 years. And they'll actually have like a whole nother wedding ceremony where they get people together and they get up and they give vows. Okay, maybe it was because they had like a rough patch. Maybe they had like a period of separation or where they weren't getting along all that well. And then all of a sudden they said, we're going to recommit ourselves to one another. And so they have another vow renewal type of ceremony. So when they go and have a vow renewal type of ceremony, they're not making new vows. They're not trying to come up with a new kind of relationship. They're going back to their original relationship. They're going back to their initial vows. And they're doing it in a very concrete way for other people to see and perhaps for them to be able to look back on and say, yes, we renewed our vows at that particular moment. And that's what Joshua wants the people of Israel to do. Now that they've settled in the land, and now that they're getting ready to move forward, let's go back to that time when we made these initial promises to the Lord. He said that he was going to take care of us. We said that we were going to follow him and him alone. Let's go back to those initial vows. Let's remember those, and let's recommit ourselves to those again. We're not going to follow after idols. Instead, we're going to worship the true God. And so that's what we have recorded for us here in the last chapter of the book of Joshua, is this vow renewal ceremony, where they go all the way back to the promises that they made during the days of Moses. The God that miraculously led them out of Egypt, the God that parted the Red Sea and gave them the land. That God, they're going to renew their commitment to him and to him alone. The God who defeated the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. They're going to commit themselves to him, that God who fought for them and won them their freedom. And so in the end, God placed them here in cities that they did not build, and he gave them olive gardens and vineyards that they did not plant. And so the admonition is, why would you go and serve other gods when you have everything you need in the true God? And here's where we get Joshua's probably most famous words. Choose this day. Choose this day whom you're going to serve. Don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to how you're going to feel next week. Do it now. Don't ride the fence. Choose the Lord and choose the Lord alone, because he is the one true God. Think about how much he has done for you. Think about how far he has brought you. And don't back down on him, and don't worship anyone or anything else. And it's kind of funny how Joshua does this. If you noticed in the verses I read, it almost comes across as Joshua is sarcastic a little bit here. Yeah, you're not going to really follow the true God. And the people have to say, no, we really are. We really are. We really want to do this. You don't want to do this. Yes, we really want to do this. We really want to stick to the true God. And so they follow Joshua's lead, and they have this vow renewal ceremony. And so then Joshua gets a large stone, and he places it by an oak tree, which is near the tabernacle. And this is a reminder of what they have vowed, that they're going to stick to the Lord no matter what. And the last thing that we learn in the book of Joshua is he lived to the ripe old age of 110, and that the entire time that he was alive, people served the Lord, and that in the entire time that his elders were alive, the people served the Lord. So what can we learn from this, as we sum up the book of Joshua here? Well, we need to do the same thing. And think about marriage vows. I made my marriage vows, 23 years ago at this point? Okay, but it's something that I have to redecide every morning. Okay, just because I made a vow 23 years ago, that's not the end of the story. I have to decide every day that I'm going to continue to be committed. The same with you. Any kind of relationship that you have, you make a daily decision to be committed. And it's the same thing here with the Israelites. They had to make a daily decision. Today I'm going to worship the Lord. I'm going to worship him alone. And it's the same thing with you and I. We wake up and there's all sorts of things that we can worship. There's all sorts of things that we can put our trust in. We need to decide. We need to choose this day. We need to choose today that we're going to serve the Lord and the Lord alone. There's an old Shakespeare story called The Merchant of Venice, and it's about a beautiful and wealthy heiress by the name of Portia. And she has a lot of people that are seeking her hand in marriage, but her father wanted her to choose somebody that was going to be committed to her. And so he laid out 3 chests. One was a gold chest, and it said on it, whoever opens this chest will gain everything that their heart desires. He laid out a silver chest, and on it said, whoever chooses me will get everything that he deserves. And the final one was a lead chest, and on it he says, whoever chooses me must risk and give all that he has. And so one by one, the suitors came and they would choose the box. Almost half of them chose the one where you get everything you desire. The other half chose, getting everything that they deserve. Only one person, and I would think, man, what's wrong with this dude? But one person chose the chest that says that they're going to risk and give all that they have. And of course, that's the one that Portia ended up choosing. Because he was the only one willing to risk it all for the princess. To go, maybe we could say all in. Use a poker term, right? Go all in on Jesus. And that's just a biblical idea. God wants us to go all in on him. He doesn't want us to just put half our chips in. He wants us to go all in. He's the one that we trust. He's the one that we're devoted to. Listen to what Jesus says in Mark 8. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will end up saving it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? This is a passage about worship. This is a passage about idolatry. Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like Jesus is talking about sacrifice. But he is. He's talking about what are you putting your trust in? Where are you placing your value? Are you putting it in the here and now and the things that you can build here and now? Things that are going to perish? Things that ultimately aren't going to last forever? Or are you putting your time and your attention and your resources in something that's going to last eternally? That's why we can deny ourselves. That's why we can follow in Jesus' sacrificial footsteps. Because this isn't our home. We don't truly belong here. We're not citizens here. We're citizens of heaven. That's where our true home is eternity. So we can sacrifice a little bit here for what we're going to gain there. Okay, so Jesus says, what profit does it give to a man to gain everything in the world, yet forfeit his soul? Which means that the flip side of that is what we should do, right? We should give what we have right now for the Lord. And because of it, we are going to gain eternal reward. And so what Jesus is saying is that we need to follow him and in his sacrificial footsteps. Jim Elliot was a famous missionary to the Ecuadorians, and he had a famous saying that you've probably heard before. But he said this, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And it's the same idea. The things that you accumulate here, you can't take them with you. They don't go beyond this life. We can build treasure in heaven, though, by using the resources that we have, the time, the talent, the treasure that God has given us to build his kingdom in this world. The things of this world are transitory. They're passing away. But a vibrant relationship with Jesus lasts forever. All right, so we need to choose this day. And really every day. Today is the most important day with regards to this because it's today. But when tomorrow is today, it's going to be just as important that we choose that day to serve the Lord and to serve him only. So we need to choose today to steer clear of idols. Okay, first of all, we need to steer clear of idols. So Kyle Idleman, he's a famous pastor. He wrote a book on modern idolatry about 10 years ago, I think, and it was called Gods at War. And he opened up with an illustration right at the beginning of the book, which I think kind of illustrates this idea pretty well. So say you have a cough. Say you have a really nagging cough, and it just won't go away. You've had it for maybe months. So you go to the doctor. Doctor, I've got this cough, keeps me up at night. I'm trying to have a conversation with people. It just interrupts the conversation. I don't know what is causing it. Could you help me with my cough? So the doctor says, okay, well, let me run some tests on you, and I'll get back to you. So runs a bunch of tests, and the doctor discovers the guy has throat cancer. Okay, and he doesn't really have very much longer to live. But he's thinking in his head, if I tell this guy, if I tell you that you have cancer, you're not going to like that. And so I just won't tell you. And so instead, he prescribes the best cough suppressant that he can possibly find. And so you start taking this cough suppressant that you get from the pharmacy that your doctor's prescribed to you, and 4 or 5 days later, your cough goes away. You're like, this guy's a miracle worker. Okay, what's going to happen? You're going to keep getting sicker and sicker until eventually it takes you. Because the doctor is not treating the problem. He's treating a symptom, right? You have to treat the root cause, or else you're never going to gain victory. And it's the same thing with sin. I mean, we have all these different sins that pop up in our life. Whether that be cheating, whether that be lying, whatever kind of sin that you have that comes up in your life, usually it's a symptom of something else. And what it's a symptom of is, who are you worshiping? Are you worshiping God, or are you worshiping yourself? Self-worship is usually the root cause. And so if we try to cut out lying, okay, well, good. But it's just going to come out somewhere else, because we haven't gone to the root cause, which is idolatry. We're worshiping something other than the Lord. And so that can be true with a number of the sins that might come up in our life. Cheating, lust, overspending, worrying, self-medicating. These are all symptoms of perhaps this self-worship that's lurking beneath the surface. We're bowing a knee to an idol, whether that idol is our own power, our own wealth, our own success, our own comfort, our own pleasure. But we can't just fix the symptoms. We have to go right at that idolatry that's beneath the surface. And the Bible spends a lot of time speaking out against idolatry. I mean, you can just pretty much open up a page in the Old Testament, and you're going to find something there about the nature of idolatry, because it's just a human problem. It's just endemic to human nature that we're trying to worship something. And a lot of times when we're not worshiping God, we replace that with something else, whether that be a false god or whether that just plain be our own selfish desires that we're worshiping. So we're told here at the end of the book of Joshua that the people of Israel, they did choose the Lord, they did choose to follow him, and as long as Joshua was alive, the people stayed away from idolatry, and that as long as his leaders were alive, as long as the elders that he taught and trained were alive, that the people followed after God and did not follow after idols. Okay? Well, you get into the next book. What's the next book? It's the book of Judges. And it doesn't take long before we learn that a new generation rose up, and we're told that they did not know the Lord. And they didn't follow the Lord. And they started to follow after idols. And things started to go downhill very fast. And we have to ask the question, okay, so the next generation didn't know the Lord. Why? Why didn't they know the Lord? We could say, well, they just didn't experience the same things. They didn't see the Jordan River parted. They didn't see the sun stand still. They didn't see the manna from heaven. But did we tell them about it? That's part of the two, that we've got to pass this on. We've got to pass this to the next generation. Choose this day whom we're going to serve means we need to teach the younger generation, the next generation, to love and to serve God as well. So what are some things here that we can learn as we try to get rid of idols? And I think it's interesting, the kind of progression that we have from the days of the conquest to today. Okay, so let's think about the days of the conquest. Strategy number one for not following after idols was, let's just not have idolaters around. That was the original plan. They were supposed to remove the Canaanites and the Amorites. They didn't. They failed. They didn't get rid of everybody like they're supposed to. So strategy number two comes in after the conquest. And it's no longer, okay, just get rid of idolaters. They're here now. So now what you need to do is you need to be separate from them. You need to make sure that even while the people around you might not be following God, that you are. Okay, so that was strategy number 2. As we get into the New Testament, though, we get into a third strategy, kind of built on top of strategy number 2. Now it's not enough just to be separate. Now we need to actively be on mission and be good influences in the world. We need to help people to know the Lord, and we need to want to help guide them to worshiping the true God. And so our goal is not just to kill or get rid of everybody that doesn't agree with us. Okay? Our goal is also not just to kind of huddle together and be separate. Our goal is to love the people that are around us and help them to know the message about Jesus. To not let them influence us, but instead to be an influence on the world. And the way we do that is by living out the character of Jesus and telling people about the good news of what Jesus has done. So what are some things that perhaps modern Americans have put their trust in instead of or ahead of God? And there's so many we could bring up. I mean, we could probably bring up dozens of them as we sat here and thought about it. But I'm just going to talk about 3, just kind of as a sample. Okay, one of them is stuff. Maybe we call this materialism. Do we view our money and possessions as ours, as the fruits of our own labor? Or do we view our money and possessions as things that have been given to us by God? I mean, this is a basic stewardship question, but I think it's also a question about where are you putting your trust and what are you worshiping? If I view the things that I have as coming from me, because I'm talented and I'm smart and I work hard, and that's why I have all the things that I have, most likely I'm going to think that I'm doing God a favor whenever I try to give some of my resources to Him, whether that's my time, talent, or treasure. If, on the other hand, I understand that everything that I have has been given to me by God, I'm going to have a completely different look at the things that are in my life. God is the one who has given me everything that I own. Everything in life belongs to Him, and He has allowed us to have. Therefore, when I give back, I'm giving back a piece of what He has blessed me with. But many in modern America, we're fixated on the acquisition of stuff, and we believe this stuff comes from ourselves. And so even, you can even see that I mentioned self-medicating before. And a lot of people self-medicate with stuff. You're feeling down about life and your relationship is going poorly. And so what do? You go out and you buy something that makes you feel better for a day or two. And then you start feeling down again. And so then you go and you self-medicate by buying something. Because it's where we are going to find our comfort. And what it is showing to us is where we are finding our safety and our security and our joy and our worth. The things that we should be finding in the Lord, we're finding in possessions instead. More money, more possessions, more self-gratification. And at the same time, ignore God and refuse to give Him thanks for the things that we have. Paul says in Timothy, he says that the love of money, literally the love of silver, is the root of all kinds of evil. Paul says in Romans that we shouldn't covet, or we shouldn't lust after things that do not belong to us. And so this tells me that it's not money that's the root of all evil. I mean, that's kind of misquoted like that sometimes. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil, which again is just selfishness. Selfishness is the root of all kinds of evil. And so you don't have to be rich to love money. You don't have to have $1 million in the bank account. You can have $12 in your bank account, and that's what you care about. That's where you're putting your energy, is in trying to acquire things. There was a businessman, and he was visited by a genie, and the genie says, I'll give you one wish, just one. And so the guy says, well, I want a copy of the financial news for 1 year, but I want it all right now in advance. And so he was a stockbroker, and so he thought, well, I can go through and I can see, how all the stocks perform over the course of a year, and then I can make all the right bets, and then it's not even going to be a flat million. Like if I ask for $1 million, it's going to be exponential to that. So the guy's like, all right, I'll give you a year's. The genie says, I'll give you a year's worth of financial news. And so as he's scrolling through the stories, he saw one that kind of gave him pause, and that was his own obituary. And that kind of changed his opinion on exactly how useful the rest of that information was going to be, because he knew the date and the time of his death. Even if he was able to make a whole bunch of money, he definitely wasn't going to be able to enjoy the fruits of it. The ultimate happiness, ultimate satisfaction is not going to be through the acquisition of stuff. We need to look through that. Instead, we need to serve and worship God and God alone. Another idol is convenience. And convenience, I think, is a close ally to the God of things, but it's slightly different. I think we've taken kind of a step back. I mean, we still live in one of the most convenient times in human history, but there's no doubt that it's less convenient today than maybe it was 2 years ago. Sometimes you go to a restaurant and you'd pull on the door and it's locked. You're like, it's 4 p.m. Why is this restaurant locked? It says staffing shortage or food shortage or something like that. You go to the store and you're looking for a particular thing and you go to the shelf where it's supposed to be and the shelf is empty. And you ask somebody, hey, where's this? Oh, it's on back order. We probably won't get it for another month or two. And then you have these YouTube videos where people just blow up about it. And what does that tell me when somebody blows up at a minor inconvenience? It tells me what they're worshiping, really. They're worshiping themselves. They're worshiping their own convenience. And it's another idol. Perhaps it's a window into what's going on in our heart. Another idol is power. Throughout Christian history, Christians have tried to tie themselves to political movements of all kinds. And I think the thought is that if I can get the political power on my side, then I can force people to be Christian. And that has not ended up very well anytime that it's tried to happen. Because I think it changes biblical Christianity. It ends up creating a new mission. The mission is no longer, okay, I'm going to reach the world for Christ by spreading the message of the good news. The mission is I want to preserve, my culture or my values at any cost. It ends up creating a new savior. No longer is it Jesus that's going to build his worldwide church through the character and words of his saints. Instead, it's going to be us that build his church by using political power. And this can quickly become a false god. Because what we start to do is we start to advocate for Christian power over Christian principles. And that's idolatry. A famous politician said it about as explicitly as I've heard it this last year. This is what he said. We've been playing t-ball for half a century while they've been playing hardball. We've turned the other cheek. And I understand that's a biblical reference, and I understand the mentality, but turning the other cheek has gotten us nowhere. So what is he saying? He's saying this living like Jesus stuff is getting in the way of us achieving power. So when the ethics of Jesus start to get in your way, that's a problem. I don't know any other word for it besides idolatry. So we need to avoid idols. And there are so many more than just these three. We could list a whole bunch going on for the rest of the day if we wanted to. But whenever we put anything over God, whenever we value anything more than him, whenever we put our trust in things that are not him, we are committing idolatry. So first part is the negative. We need to avoid idolatry. The second part is the positive. We need to choose instead to cling to God. The word that Joshua uses here for clinging to God is the same word they use in modern Hebrew for glue. Like you go to the store and you buy glue. It says that word right on the front of it. And so the idea is that we need to stick to God and cling to God and him alone. Choose this day. Who are you going to follow? Choose this day. Who you're going to put your trust in. All right, why do some musicians or athletes excel and others remain mediocre? Why? Well, there's a guy in 1997 who was asking that very question. His name was Gary. And so he set out to do a study. And so he randomly selected hundreds of fifth grade students who were beginning to learn an instrument. And he just wanted to follow them and see who became proficient and who excelled and who didn't really play well. And he wanted to kind of look at a number of different factors to see, what was the determining thing that said whether they were going to be successful or not. And so after he kind of collated all of his data, he quickly found it wasn't IQ. It didn't matter how smart or dumb you were. That didn't matter to how well you played an instrument. He also found that it wasn't musicality. It didn't matter whether you're just naturally musical or not. That had no bearing on whether you mastered your instrument. He found it wasn't math skills. It wasn't income level. It wasn't even whether or not you had rhythm. The single best indicator to answer the question, how long do you think that you will play? That's it. Before they'd even pick up an instrument, you ask the kid, how long do you think you're going to play this instrument? And if the fifth grade kid says, I'm going to play through middle school, that kid will never learn the instrument. They become poor. If the kid says, I think I'm going to play this instrument through high school, those kids become middle of the road. They're not great, they're not awful, but they're proficient. If the kid says, I'm going to play this instrument for the rest of my life, those are the ones that ended up excelling. So before anybody taught them a note, before they probably even purchased their instrument, the greatest indicator was already there. How committed were they going to be? Was this something they were going to commit to just for a couple years? Is this something they were going to commit to till, the end of high school? Or is this something they were going to commit to for their entire life? That's what made the difference. And it's the same thing as a predictor of spiritual success. Who are we going to serve? What are we going to value? In whom are we going to place our trust? We need to say, as for me and my household, I'm with Jesus. I'm with Jesus. And I may stumble and I may backslide, but when I come to my senses, I'm with Jesus. I'm clinging to him. I'm sticking to him. And nothing or nobody else is going to take that place. Let's pray. Dear Lord, again, as we think about this book of Joshua, and we saw all these great promises that you've made, the promises that you made to Abraham, we saw them fulfilled in this book. But even after all the dust settled and all the promises were fulfilled and they were in the land and they were enjoying the land, that didn't answer all the questions. There's still one question left. Who are the Israelites going to worship moving forward? Were they going to stick with the true God, or were they going to go with somebody else? Lord, and I know that's a temptation for all of us, especially in the good times of life. It's easy to forget that you're the one who has gotten us to where that we are, and to choose to worship or put our value in something else. So Lord, I pray that on this Father's Day that we make a vow that as for us, we are going to believe and trust in Jesus and Jesus alone. We pray that in your wonderful name. Amen. All right, turn with me to hymn